Hey everyone, welcome to the Pod Cafe. I'm Nick Potts.
And I'm Emily Potts.
And we drink coffee and talk about the podcast we're listening to.
Yeah, we do. We're kind of like a book club of podcasts, you know?
We kind of are like the book club of podcasts. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's cool. We listen to things and then we talk about it. It's like a book club, but it's better.
Yes, that's exactly right. So what kind of coffee are you drinking at the Pod Club meeting today?
The Pod Club. Yeah, so I'm drinking just some plain iced coffee. It's from Dunn Brothers, which is, I don't know if you have Dunn Brothers by you, but it's a pretty normal coffee chain around where I live.
I think we do.
I feel like you probably do. But anyway, I'm just drinking a plain iced coffee because it's springtime and I like iced coffee. And you know what else? Have you ever made iced coffee at home? Because I find it to be a horrible task. The only way I know to do it is make a regular cup of coffee, cool it down, then add some ice to it. And what a process. I prefer to buy it.
Well, because you can't just put the straight hot coffee over the ice, because then the ice melts and waters down your coffee.
I know. That's why it's iced coffee I just feel like it's always something I'll buy and never something I'll make.
Yeah, you have to. And I don't know what their process is. I feel like it might be the same, but for some reason they do it way better than I ever could.
Yeah, I actually feel like the fact that theirs is probably pre-cooled, you know? It's
maybe.
So what are you drinking?
I'm drinking the nondescript today. I don't know what brand it is. It's just a K-cup. It's an organic K-cup. It's a breakfast blend, and it was just in a bowl with other K-cups, and so I don't know what the brand is. There's an M logo on it, an M with a check mark, but that's all I got. I don't know what kind it is.
Okay. You know what else I was thinking about? You know how K-cups are just pretty terrible for the environment?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of sucks that we use them. I really hate that I drink K-cups, but making a pot of coffee when you live by yourself is just wasteful. What is the way to drink coffee that's not being wasteful, you know?
It is, and when I make a pot of coffee, something about the size of the actual pot is very misleading, because if you put only enough water in there for 1 or 2 cups worth of coffee, it looks like you have put no water in there. So I always put 4 to 8 cups worth of water, and I make the pot of coffee, and then I feel like I have to drink all the coffee myself, otherwise I'm wasting it. So I get over caffeinated.
There's clearly an opportunity to eliminate waste in coffee drinking. Challenge to a listener. Go.
Yeah, I thought somebody came up with a way. No, I think they just came out with biodegradable K-cups. That's a thing, I think.
Oh, there's also this thing on, you can buy it on Amazon, but it's a tool that essentially cuts the top of the K-cup, because the reason you can't recycle it is because it has all the coffee grounds in it, so that you can empty out the coffee grounds and then recycle it. We bought them at my office. They don't work. So that tool could make it recyclable, but it needs to be made so it works.
You know what does work, and Abby has this, is they have a hard plastic K-cup that you don't throw away. It's reusable. You wash it out, and you just put coffee grounds in there and put that in your Keurig, and you make coffee, and when you're done, you wash out the grounds, and you keep reusing it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a thing, too. I've seen those. Maybe I should get one of those.
Yeah, yeah, that seems pretty useful.
I'm probably going to go to Target today. It's a Sunday, so I'll check them out when I'm there.
Yeah, all right. Well, so what do we listen to today? Why don't you bring us into the podcast this week?
Yeah, I'm so pumped to talk to you about this because, this is kind of fun because last week, we talked about one of your favorite people now and the reason why you wanted to do this podcast, I guess. And this week, we get to talk about another one of I'm going to call this a guilty pleasure, I guess, because I absolutely love watching like prison and crime documentaries on Netflix. And I feel like this podcast is just right up my alley because of that. So let me tell you a little about it. It's called Ear Hustle, and there's 2 seasons of it so far. And it's really cool, and I thought you would like this a little more because I know you don't love crime podcasts, but this isn't really about anything related to crime or, like what happened for these people to be in prison, but it's more of a storytelling type podcast because each episode is a unique story. So it's all about life inside prison. So it's the producers of it are a man who's currently incarcerated. His name is Earlonne Woods, and he is in prison for attempted second-degree robbery. So he's in 31 years to life in prison. And while he's in there, he's part of this program, I guess, where he's studying like film and audio and things like that. And so because of that, he gets to create this podcast with someone who volunteers at the prison, and her name is Nigel Poor, and she's a visual artist in the California area, and so she's producing this podcast with Earlonne. And
this
that's
podcast
kind of
was completely fascinating, but you just answered my first question was, how do they have access to the stuff they need to make a podcast from prison?
Yeah, so, and honestly, if I could have assumed that you have all the time in the world, I would tell you to start this podcast from the beginning and listen to all of the episodes. But because they're not all connected, I just kind of chose one. But you do learn more about the actual prison that they're in and kind of why this is possible when you hear the other episodes. So Earlonne Woods is at San Quentin State Prison. And this is like a prison that people try to get into. Like when they're in prison anywhere else, they're like working on good behavior, working with corrections officers, trying to get into San Quentin because they have all of these programs and resources, and they get to basically like kind of do a lot of things, which is weird to think about. But this prison has a lot of those benefits. So this is like a study that he's doing while he's there.
Yeah, this is a really interesting podcast. I really liked it. I might just listen to the whole thing. But so where is it on the scale of things? Is this like a Martha Stewart prison? Is this like a country club prison, or it just has more things available to offer the inmates?
It's not a Martha Stewart prison. I wouldn't call it that. But it does have a lot more available. And I don't know why. I don't know if there's something because it's a state prison, if that makes it different or whatnot. But it does have a lot more available. So they just have a lot more opportunity to do things besides serve their prison sentence. But it also has, if you listen to some of the other episodes, there's episodes about just the prison cells, and when you hear about them, yes, they are a very normal what you think about when you think of a prison cell. They have another episode that's about what they call the SHU, but it's essentially solitary confinement, and they do have that in the prison as well. So there's a lot of things that are very normal. They just also have a lot of other benefits that make it a slightly better prison situation than others.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why, like, all prisons aren't like that. I mean, I guess it probably has to do with the population. I guess I don't know what the population in this specific prison is.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess it's probably a little bit of that and a little bit of, like, funding, depending on, the location of the prison and... Yeah, I don't know. That would be my guess. Or maybe the proximity to other prisons and whatnot. I don't know. These are all just guesses.
Well, it was really fascinating because the people in this podcast, the inmates in this podcast, are crazy, like, creative, and they have crazy ingenuity and seem like really intelligent and innovative, and it's nuts to me that the guy, shoot, what's the guy's name again? The guy who does the podcast, the main inmate?
Earlonne Woods. You can call him E or E-Man. He has some nicknames.
E-Man is like really well spoken, and just none of the people they interview or talk to seem like the stereotypical prisoner, which, I don't know, it just brought up an interesting question to me. It brought me back to my criminal justice undergrad. Like, how much are these inmates in this prison just based off of, like, circumstances and environment, and maybe not necessarily personality or, like, a mental thing? Like, it seems like a lot of them are smart enough that if they were in different circumstances, they maybe wouldn't have had to resort to crime to get by. I don't. This is some thoughts running through my head as I was listening to him.
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing about this is, so most of the inmates at San Quentin are a little older, because it does take a while for your, I don't know what it's based on, but like behavior or status in a prison to actually be placed there, to like earn that position in San Quentin. So a lot of them are older. So I think what the cool thing about this is, it would have been interesting to hear like Earlonne when he was first incarcerated and wherever that was versus how he is now, because it seems like they just grow up a lot. And even though they're growing up in prison, they're probably, like they're learning a lot about themselves, and they're figuring out how to better themselves. So that's why this podcast is so interesting, because sure, this is not the stereotypical what you think of someone who's serving 30 plus years in prison would be like, but it's interesting to hear how he is and how he would have changed. I mean, so Earlonne, he's the one that you'll hear from the most because he's co-producing this with Nigel, and he was, since being incarcerated, he's received his GED and like several other certifications in vocational trades, and he's attended like self-help groups, and he's a member of the San Quentin chapter of Northern California Society of Professional Journalism, which is like crazy to think about. So he actually writes articles for like local newspapers while being inside the prison. So this is definitely like, these guys that are in here are not what you would expect to hear from at all from someone that might be serving life in prison.
This is really funny, actually, because most prisons, I think, focus on punishment, incarceration as a form of punishment, as opposed to rehabilitation. And it's fascinating that a prison that seems to be doing the best job of rehabilitating inmates is one where people are there for life or 30 plus years. So that's an interesting dynamic. Like, you would think there should be a bigger push to shift the more rehabilitation side to shorter sentence.
Yeah. No, I was kind of thinking about that too, because every time they introduce a new inmate, depending on the episode or what they're talking about, I'm always like, wow, this person has been in jail for this long, or has been and is going to be in prison for this much longer. They seem great. Like, they seem fine. So that's totally true. And then, so you have Earlonne, and he's inside the prison. And then Nigel Poor, she started just volunteering at this prison for about 6 years before she started producing this in the media lab with Earlonne. And it's kind of crazy to hear her talk about the prison as well, because she always talks about how it's so friendly. She loves going there. Like, it's just like great to be around all of them. And it's a weird to think about this podcast about men in prison being so positive. Like, everyone is so positive and fun to listen to, and that's why I think it's so awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool perspective to hear. Like, I was really surprised when, in this episode specifically, they were talking about, like, fishing or throwing their line out, to hear, like, how cooperative everyone is with each other. I'm sure it's, it's still prison. I'm sure it's still sort of a hostile environment, but they talked a lot about how much they all work together in there, which was interesting.
Yeah, so each episode kind of tells a story about something else happening, like something that goes on in prison. And this episode is called The Workaround. So basically they say, you're in prison, so you don't have a lot. You don't have a lot of easy ways of doing things. So there's always, the inmates find what they call like a workaround for everything in prison. I guess in general, I mean, the podcast is called Ear Hustle because ear hustling is another like prison term, and it just means eavesdropping, so listening to what's going on in the prison. But they kind of have all these terms for all these other workarounds, and I thought some of the funny ones were the way they were talking about how they iron their pants when they want to like look nicer for either like their families visiting or something like where they want to just look a little nicer, and they like smooth out the pants, even use some floor wax on it if they have it, and then just put it under their mat while they're sleeping on it. Like, it's funny that they think about like, I would really like to iron my pants right now so that I look nice tomorrow, but I can't, so I'm gonna flatten it out by sleeping on top of them.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying about like the ingenuity and creativity in there. Like, it's insane that they could figure that out, and they figure out how to make devices to pass things around. They figure out how to make better soap in like complex processes, and they figure all this stuff out. I feel like we should just put some regular non-criminals in these environments and see what they can figure out for like different societal problems.
Yeah. No, the soap one was funny to me because the guy, he goes by Bucci, so he had like a chemistry or biology background or something.
He was a chef. He was a chef.
Oh, he was a chef. So yeah, so I mean, he just like in general comes from a background of being able to like concoct things, and when he was just mixing things and creating all these soaps and then trading them, and he was like, yeah, so they're called Bucci bars. And I was like, you just started a business from within prison. That's awesome. Go you.
Yeah, and like complex processes, like I said, like he's talking about binding agents and like melting different fruits down and stuff and putting the skins in there, and yeah, it's insane. It's like a more complex version of when you hear like these rappers that will get arrested and then they'll put out mixtapes from prison.
Yeah,
it's like that, but businesses, and like I don't know, like this podcast is cool, and again with the cooperative feel in there, like the music they use in this podcast, the beats are done by another inmate, and they get all these different inmates to interview, and it's cool. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is really cool. The fishing thing is funny. So they're like trying to pass a note to someone however many cells down, and I was kind of fascinated that works. Like, not that the process of passing a note works, but that someone doesn't like intercept it, or or someone's like not passing it or something like that, that they're like what you said, like they cooperate and they work together so much. It's kind of crazy because in my head I would have always thought like it's prison, it's hostile, everyone's in it for themselves, but they're all like just there to help. So if someone wants to pass a note and slide it down the hall to some cellmates, everyone in between helps.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they just found a better way to do it. Like they're all stuck in there in close proximity together for a long period of time. So it's like live that way, or do you want to constantly live in fear of getting shanked or, beat up or something?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's awesome. It's so cool. And like the guy that makes the soaps, because he was a chef, he kind of, I think he gets to be part of like their cooking program that they have there too. And it's kind of crazy because a lot of these inmates, when you hear their stories about how they got to where they are, a lot of them were really young. So skills like cooking or, really taking care of themselves, or even things like as simple as ironing is probably something they didn't really do much or weren't taught how to do it because they went to prison at such a young age. So that's like kind of what I said about them growing up there. Like they're figuring it out. They're just doing it from inside prison, it's just kind of crazy.
So you think some of them found these skills and interests in prison and not necessarily before they went to prison? Because maybe they're in prison, their options are pretty limited.
Yeah, I do think so. You hear about some of them. Well, I guess Earlonne in specific, like, I don't know too much, I guess, about what he did before he went to prison, but while he was there, in getting his GED, and he expressed an interest in just art and storytelling, and then out of that, like, is producing this podcast. I guess I feel like this is an opportunity that he wouldn't have done outside of prison.
Probably not. I don't know where he was from, but yeah, I don't know. Probably not. I know the soap guy was a chef before prison.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a unique perspective that most people don't get. I'd like to know like how many prisons are like this one and how many are vastly different.
Yeah, I think that would be cool to know too, because the ones that I watch on my Netflix documentaries, so my very limited research, don't seem this way, or they kind of focus more, and maybe this is just the perspective of the media. So this podcast is really focusing on a lot of just what life is like, versus most of the documentaries I've seen focus more on maybe how the prison is run, or like how maybe more of that just negative side of it. So maybe a little bit of it is perspective and what they're choosing to focus on, but it would be interesting to know, like, do other prisons really have these type of programs?
I think that's just because that makes interesting TV, but the reason this podcast is so interesting is because everything else is focused on that other side of things. So there's very little media that shows you this different perspective of living in prison, which is, the reason this podcast could be so successful, I think.
I think the other big piece of why they were like, we find all these workarounds, because they kind of, they do really care about taking care of themselves, like how some of the soaps, the Bucci guy made them specifically for acne and exfoliating and things like that. It's, they do care about taking care of themselves while they're there, because they're still alive, they're still doing things, they want to, be good to their bodies. But the other side of it is that they talked about how it really helps to have these types of hobbies or things to do, to have the environment around them kind of fade away. So they were like, we do these things to kind of get lost in something else, so that the San Quentin environment around us just fades away, and you kind of have moments where you forget where you are and why you're there and things like that.
I mean, the best example of that is the king of the nerds in the prison, right?
I that's basically why I chose this episode, because I thought you would really enjoy that piece.
It's all right. Let me take you to nerd school real quick.
Yeah, you do that because this is the part that lost me. Like, I listened to everything. As soon as this guy started talking, I was like, you have now lost me.
So this is really fun because, again, with the creativity. So this guy,
His name's Mesro.
Mesro, he created his own, like, fantasy crossover in prison. So he's using two things. The first is Dungeons and Dragons. So he's crossing that over with a card game called Magic the Gathering. So these are two separate nerdy hobbies, both created by Wizards of the Coast. D&D and Magic the Gathering are products of the company Wizards of the Coast, and Magic the Gathering is a deck building card game. So it's very much like how nerdy can we get, like the Pokemon card game or like Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that. So you build the deck and it's got like creatures and like resources and stuff, and you have a life point total, and the idea is to get your opponent's life point to 0 without going to 0 yourself. And then Dungeons and Dragons is usually a tabletop role-playing experience where you create a character, you go into this fantasy world and, you know, explore dungeons and do quests and whatever. So this is the most fascinating part, is that he crossed the two, which are usually separate, but he created a fantasy world, taking the D&D role-playing aspect of that, and made Magic the Gathering something they do in this fantasy world. So it's like how they I forgot exactly what his world entails, but it's like how they battle things or like find artifacts and stuff in his fantasy world that he created. So it's like an ultimate.
That was like the nerdiest 3 minutes I've ever listened to.
Well, spoiler alert, I am a super nerd in some aspects. I'm not into Magic the Gathering. Like, in middle school, I tried to play it, was never very good at it, could never really get hooked on it. D&D I am super into, though. I've been into that for a long time, still do it to this day. Love listening to actual play podcasts. So, I don't know, the crossover was really cool. It was really funny to hear a prisoner doing it.
And I love that he took like a normal deck of playing cards and then photocopied dungeon masters and dragons and wizard pictures, and then put plastic sheets like to cover them, or put them in plastic sleeves, so that he made his own deck of cards. Like, I would think if I had a deck of cards, sure, I would want to play card games, but he's like, no card games. Let me put some wizards on these, and we're going to play some Magic games.
Okay, so what he did was recreate Magic the Gathering cards and decks. The hosts were being funny because they don't know about that stuff. They were like combining the card game and the D&D thing, so like, I don't know. It was funny, and actually, I literally laughed out loud when the guy was trying to get the host to roleplay with him.
Yeah, that was hilarious. He starts just going into this like mythical story, and I was like, that would not get me to come play a game with you. Would that get you to come play a game with him? I feel like yes.
Well, I'm already hooked. I'm already into it. He doesn't have to convince me. But it was hilarious when he was like, "The Cyclops is coming after you to eat you. What do you do?" And he was like, "Well, I wake up."
Yeah, so I'm gonna wake up.
The guy was like, "Oh really man, okay." Yeah, but it was.
And, I really liked that they were like, he was talking about it, and he's like, well, a Magic the Gathering game can happen at any time. So he always has his cards on him. And I'm like, this is just not what I expected to hear about in prison. Like, I was thinking maybe a fight would happen at any time and you would have to, fight someone off before they stab you. Not a Magic the Gathering game could happen at any time. You must have your cards on you and you don't want to lose your points.
Well, that's the really fun part about his crossovers, because, when you play Magic the Gathering, you sit down and you just play a game of Magic, and he's made it so it's like an integral part of his fantasy world. So he even said, like, if you walk past someone and you got your deck and they don't have theirs, that's a loss. They lose. So, like, he's integrated that game into a different Wizards of the Coast system, and it's just, like, really inventive.
It was. It's so funny how, I mean, it's amazing to listen to how creative they were. And then it's also kind of awesome to hear, they all have like their different roles in the prison. So this guy was like very clearly set up of like, he's the nerdy one. And it's almost just kind of fascinating how different they can all be, but they're all in the same prison. They've all done something to get there. And no one like faults anyone for their interest at all or anything. Like, Erlan was talking to this guy, talking about his story and everything, but he's never like saying anything negative about him. They're just all doing what they need to do to pass the time while they're there. And I think just like hearing all the different ways they do that was so interesting to me.
Yeah, I'd like to think it's more a product of just growing up than being in prison. Like, I kind of feel like as I've gotten older, it's become a little less taboo to be into nerdy things like that. Well, first of all, being a nerd has become kind of like popular now. Like, it's cool to really like comic book characters and like the superhero stuff.
Yeah.
But also, like, I mean, it's D&D is like the peak of nerdism, and still, like, D&D is becoming pretty popular these days. They have a lot of actual play podcasts. They're personally like, I'm running a campaign right now, and there's people playing that never would have ever considered even thinking about participating in the past.
Does running a campaign mean playing a game?
So what I mean by running a campaign is I am basically that guy in prison. I am the DM. I am the dungeon master. So I just, I run things. I walk the rest of the players through the campaign.
Gotcha.
But yeah, like, I don't know. There's people getting into it who would have never done it before. And I think maybe some of it is like introspective, where you just don't care as much what people think. So that's probably a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much of that when you're younger, just like trying to that feeling of like trying to fit in, or you don't want to be the odd one out or something. And some people are really great at kind of overcoming that and just being okay with being who they are. But there's definitely struggles for a lot of people to, maybe not show their true interest because of that. But when you get older, it's just like no one cares anymore. Do what you want to do, be who you are. And I mean, at this point in their lives, and probably how long they've been in this prison and how long they will still be there, they're all just like, this is what I like to do, I'm going to do it.
Well, that's the other thing. Like, being in close quarters of incarceration, that process is probably rushed like you wouldn't believe. Because, first of all, you're just looking for ways to take your mind off things, keep you busy, and just, like, help you get through this time. And you probably just learn pretty quick in that environment that it's more important to just have those things than to worry about being made fun of for those things. So I'm sure they just get over it a lot quicker.
Yeah, totally. And I can't remember. I don't think it's in this episode, but it kind of could fall into this episode just in terms of like interests and what people do. But another guy was talking about it's definitely a different episode, but they have a marathon at the prison. So this guy was, he'd never really been a runner, but he was like, I'm going to do this. He was like, I'm going to say I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it. And so they did this marathon, and they run like hundreds of laps around just the yard of the prison. And they have it mapped. You do this X number, and I know it was over 100. I can't remember what it was. But that many laps around the yard is a marathon. And not that many people had finished it, but he was like, when I was going, all I was thinking about was, I have this goal. I like doing it. I'm going to accomplish it. And he was talking about how he was the last one to finish. He didn't really train, but he really wanted to do this. And he did a marathon in prison. And I was just like, holy cow, that's like an amazing thing. You just don't think about all of these very normal things also happening inside a prison.
That's so awesome and so crazy to think about. And it makes me so curious to see like what the majority of prisons are like, and if our stereotypical view of a prison is for the most part accurate, or just the perspective being portrayed by most media. Like, I wonder how much our viewpoint is swayed on what it's actually like in there.
Yeah, and so I was just kind of looking up a little bit about it, just because now I'm really curious, and I wish I would have looked this up before, but it looks like San Quentin State Prison has a couple different facilities. So I think what we're hearing from is just more the correctional complex of the facility, but they also have like death row and executions that happen at this prison. So it seems like it's a little bit all over the board, but I think I love hearing this piece of it, because this is it's something I didn't even think existed. And it almost made me think, some of these guys, when they do serve, a lot of them will get out at some point and they'll be back out in the world. And then I kept thinking about like how much that seems like they'll struggle, just because being in here so long, and then they have this long incarceration under their belt. And I was just thinking, these guys seem like great guys, but are they going to get a job? Are they going to be seen as these just, felons of some sort? And I kind of kept thinking about that while I was listening to it too.
Well, I think it seems like these people in particular will have an easier time readjusting back into society than what I felt like most prisoners would, because it sounds like they've put a lot of work into developing skills and I don't know, like interests and stuff they could pursue outside. Unfortunately, like being a felon is gonna hurt you, so the typical career path is gonna be a lot tougher for them to go down. But I think it sounds like they could have an okay time at finding their own ways to reintegrate into society. Like, he could just do another podcast, Life After Prison. The other guy could start his own soap company, or go back to being a chef.
Or a restaurant, yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff these people could do, I feel like. The one guy could make beats that he makes for the podcast.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's so true. I mean, these guys do seem like they will be better off once they get out. And it's so funny, because when I found this podcast, I literally listened to pretty much all of it in just a few days, because I was so fascinated to learn more. And then by the end of it, I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, I know these guys did terrible things to get there, but I kind of want them to get out. And I was like, I don't think that's the goal of this podcast. It's supposed to just talk more about what life is like in prison. But I really came to like these people.
Yeah, you do. You kind of like them, and it's easy to forget that they are in prison for a reason. So, who knows how much they still struggle with those reasons or how far along they are in rehabilitation. But, I guess you do got to kind of remember that they ended up there for a reason, especially for 30-year sentences. So they're not all great, probably, but they're definitely not.
But their
just
stories are cool.
Yeah, their stories are very cool.
And what they're doing there is pretty awesome. And it's kind of amazing to see even Nigel Poor's involvement as just a co-producer, going from being a volunteer and working with the media program and now wanting to produce this podcast. And it's awesome to see the support that they have too. Earlonne is just, he seems really connected with Nigel, and I feel like that's a really strong influence on his rehabilitation as well.
Yeah, I wonder who, you listen to the whole thing, who initiated this collaboration? Did he want to do the podcast first, or was the option kind of brought to him?
So it started as so Nigel Poor was volunteering as a teacher. They have like a prison university project at San Quentin, and she started with a group of incarcerated men producing a radio project, and it was called the San Quentin Prison Report, and I think it still airs on a radio station, but from that they kind of developed it into this podcast. And yeah, I think that's how it started. And this podcast has gotten a lot of buzz around it. It was the winner of Radiotopia's podcast contest in 2016, and it was chosen from like more than 1,500 entries, which is crazy. So people really enjoy hearing this perspective of prison, and I hope they keep it going.
I could definitely see it winning. It's because it's a great podcast in terms of not just content, but like structure. Like, it really keeps you interested, because I don't know if they do this in every episode, because I only listened to the one episode, but I loved the ongoing like cliffhanger that they kept coming back to with the Fifi bag. They introduce it first thing in the beginning, and then the whole running like question throughout the whole podcast is, what is a Fifi? What is a Fifi bag? And they keep bringing it up, like integrating it into different points of the podcast, and then they leave you hanging because they don't tell you, and then until the end you finally find out what a Fifi bag is. So that was a really cool kind of tool to use in podcasting.
Yeah, I can't remember if all of them are like that, but I do remember being like, what am I going to learn what this Fifi bag is? And then you finally learn it, and I'm like, I wish I didn't know what a Fifi bag was.
Yeah, I'm not going to say what a Fifi bag is, because it's inappropriate, and I don't know who's listening to this podcast, so.
And people should just go listen to Ear Hustle and figure out what a Fifi bag is for themselves.
Yeah, you want to find out what a Fifi is, go listen to Ear Hustle. They can tell it for you. We don't need to rehash that out.
Yeah. But yeah, I really like this podcast. I think if you have some time and you're interested, you should listen to the rest of it. I think you would really like a lot of the other episodes. This is why it took me so long to pick which one I wanted us to talk about, because I listened to all of them, and then I re-listened to my favorite 3, and then decided on this one. But there's a ton of really great episodes, and it's a really cool podcast.
Yeah, I think I will actually go back and listen to the rest of them. There's not that many out, right? I only saw 17 or something.
Yeah, and they're all really short. They do a great job of like keeping the stories really concise and telling what you need to know, and not, lingering on with anything else. So there's 2 seasons. Yeah, I think about 8 or 9 episodes each season, and they're all 25 to 35 minutes long. Awesome podcast. I love it. I really like just the characters, listening to them develop as the podcast goes on. So it's really cool. And because they're not all connected, you don't really have to listen to them in order. So if you read a description and you like it, you can listen to them out of order too. As you listen to more, you get a little more context about the prison and how it's run and who they are, and so it's really cool.
One thing I do want to mention, and I don't want to talk about it necessarily because I think it'll lead down a longer conversation road, but an interesting component to this all-male prison is Lady J, who identifies as a female.
Oh, yeah. Was Lady J in this episode?
Lady J was in this episode when they were talking about
makeup.
She had crazy, inventive ways to make makeup where she would take magazine pages that had a high pigment content and shave off the colors and mix it with oil and water and stuff and make makeup that way, which is just brilliant. I have no idea how you would figure out to do that, but
yeah, I totally forgot that Lady J was in this episode. She is an amazing character to listen to because, gosh, when would you ever think of someone who she identifies as a female living in this all-male prison, makes her own makeup, but probably looks very similar to what you would think she would have looked like outside of prison because her resources are so limited.
Yeah, and I don't know, where she's at in terms of identifying. I don't know if she's just a guy who's identifying. I don't know if she's trans or where she's at in that process or if she wants to be in that process, but she is an interesting character nonetheless in a all-male prison. But
yeah, there's a lot of really interesting characters across both seasons, so I think everyone should go check it out and listen for yourselves and get this whole new perspective on what it's like to be in prison. I think this was a really fun one to talk about, and I loved it. And I'm excited to see what podcast you choose next week.
Yep, no idea
teasers?
yet.
No idea. Okay.
No idea. Could be anything.
But for all our listeners out there, thanks for sticking with us on episode 5. Woohoo!
Yeah, we're cruising.
I feel like we're getting somewhere. Yeah. So, let us know if you have any feedback or, just want to chat or send us some praise or send us some thoughts. You can tweet at us at _podcafe. You can email us at podcafe.contact@gmail.com. You can listen to us on podcafe.libsyn.com or on YouTube, Spotify, Google
Play.
Music? Google Play?
Google Play Music?
Google Play
Google
Music.
Play. I don't know.
Wherever you find it convenient to find our podcast. And that's all we got. Happy Sunday.
I've been really considering the sign-off or the outro tagline. And
yeah, how's that going?
I don't have an answer yet, but
okay.
I think it's got to be a lot easier than we're making it, because have you listened to My Brother and Me's sign off?
Yes.
Do you know what it is? They say Justin, after every episode, at the end of every episode, Justin McElroy goes, "Kiss your dad square on the lips."
Oh yeah, I was like, I think I do. Yep.
I don't know the origin of that, and I don't know why they say it, and it makes zero sense, but that's it. So it's got to be easier to come up with a sign off.
Okay. I still don't have one at this moment, but maybe it has to, maybe that came really, authentically somehow. Maybe something will come like that for us.
Yeah, it has to. It can't be forced.
Maybe eventually we'll play off of our book club a little bit.
Yeah.
Keep clubbing. Happy clubbing. How about clubbing?
Clubbing.
We're going clubbing.
We're going coffee clubbing.
Coffee clubbing. Okay.
I don't know. We'll work on it. All right, guys. Have a good week.